reopening of the Elmwood Fairground was the event of the year. After 2 decades of abandonment, the grounds had been restored to their former glory, a vibrant array of colors and lights promising a night of fun and excitement. The small town buzzed with anticipation, its residents flocking to the gates as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fairground. Ellie Sullivan clutched her ticket tightly, her heart racing with excitement. The fairground had always been a source of fascination for her, a place of mystery and allure. As a child, she had often wandered past the rusted gates, imagining the laughter and joy that once filled the air. Now, at 16, she finally had the chance to experience it for herself. She joined her friends, Jake and Megan, at the entrance. The air was filled with the scents of cotton candy and popcorn, mingling with the distant sound of carnival music. Laughter and chatter echoed around them as families and groups of friends made their way through the maze of attractions. "Can you believe it's finally open?" Megan asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "I've heard so many stories about this place." "Yeah, it's about time," Jake replied, grinning. "I heard they've got some amazing rides. Let's check out the Ferris wheel first." Ellie nodded, feeling a thrill of anticipation. The Ferris wheel stood tall and imposing at the far end of the fairground, its colorful lights blinking in the twilight. As they made their way through the crowd, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced around but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual hustle and bustle of the fair. They reached the Ferris wheel, its creaking metal structure illuminated by a cascade of lights. The ride operator, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, gave them a toothy grin as he ushered them into one of the carriages. The door clanged shut behind them, and the ride began to move, lifting them high above the fairground. From their vantage point, they could see the entire layout of the fair. The lights below twinkled like a sea of stars, and the distant sounds of laughter and screams floated up to them. It was beautiful, almost magical. But as the wheel turned, Ellie's gaze was drawn to a dark, shadowy corner of the fairground, where the lights seemed to flicker and die. "Hey, do you guys see that?" she asked, pointing towards the darkened area. Jake squinted, trying to make out what she was indicating. "Yeah, that's weird. Maybe it's just a power outage or something." Megan shivered, rubbing her arms. "It looks creepy. Let's hope they fix it soon." The ride continued, and they soon forgot about the dark corner as they descended back to the ground. As they stepped off the Ferris wheel, a thick fog began to roll in, blanketing the fairground in an eerie mist. The vibrant lights now appeared dim and ghostly, casting long, shifting shadows. "This fog came out of nowhere," Ellie remarked, a chill running down her spine. "Yeah, it's kind of spooky," Jake agreed. "Let's check out the haunted house next. It's perfect for this kind of weather." Megan nodded enthusiastically, and they made their way towards the haunted house. The structure loomed ahead, a decrepit mansion with broken windows and peeling paint. Its facade was designed to instill fear, and it succeeded. Ellie felt a sense of foreboding as they approached the entrance. As they entered the haunted house, the door slammed shut behind them with a resounding bang. The air inside was cold and damp, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air. They moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridors, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. Suddenly, Ellie heard a faint whisper, so soft she thought she might have imagined it. She turned to her friends, but they seemed oblivious, their attention focused on the creepy decorations and animatronics. "Did you guys hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hear what?" Megan asked, glancing around nervously. "I don't know. It sounded like a whisper." Jake laughed, trying to ease the tension. "It's probably just the sound effects. This place is supposed to be scary, remember?" Ellie nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As they continued through the haunted house, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Ellie could make out fragments of words, but they made no sense. Help. Trapped. Leave. Her heart pounded in her chest as they reached the final room. The walls were covered in faded, torn wallpaper, and an old, cracked mirror hung on one side. In the center of the room was a dusty, antique rocking chair, its seat empty and swaying slightly. Ellie felt a cold hand grip her shoulder, and she spun around, expecting to see one of her friends playing a prank. But there was no one there. "Did you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feel what?" Jake replied, looking genuinely confused. "A hand. On my shoulder." Megan's face paled. "We need to get out of here. Now." They hurried out of the haunted house, emerging into the foggy night air. The fairground seemed even more ominous than before, the cheerful lights and sounds now feeling like a distant memory. "What just happened in there?" Ellie asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know, but I don't like it," Megan replied. "Let's stick together and stay in the well-lit areas." They agreed, but as they moved through the fairground, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the whispers continued to haunt her. The reopening night of the Elmwood Fairground had promised fun and excitement, but Ellie and her friends were about to discover that some secrets are better left buried. The fog grew denser as the night wore on, wrapping the fairground in a shroud of mystery. Ellie, Jake, and Megan stuck close together, their earlier excitement replaced by an uneasy tension. The haunted house had rattled them more than they cared to admit, but they pushed forward, determined to enjoy the night. "Let's check out the old roller coaster," Jake suggested, trying to lighten the mood. "I heard they refurbished it completely. It's supposed to be amazing." Ellie and Megan nodded, and they made their way to the roller coaster. The once rickety wooden structure now gleamed with fresh paint and sturdy beams. The line was short, and they soon found themselves strapped into a carriage, ready for the ride. As the coaster clattered to life and began its ascent, Ellie glanced around. The fog swirled thickly below them, creating an eerie, otherworldly landscape. The higher they climbed, the more the fairground transformed into a ghostly labyrinth. The first drop took her breath away, and for a moment, all her fears were swept away in the thrill of the ride. But as the coaster hurtled through twists and turns, Ellie heard the whispers again. They were louder now, almost deafening, and seemed to come from all around her. "Help! Trapped! Leave!" Ellie gripped the safety bar, her knuckles white. She glanced at her friends, but they seemed oblivious, screaming and laughing with exhilaration. She shut her eyes, willing the whispers to stop, but they only grew more insistent. The ride came to a screeching halt, and Ellie stumbled out of the carriage, her legs shaky. She looked at Jake and Megan, who were still buzzing with adrenaline. "That was insane!" Jake exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. "Did you feel that drop?" Ellie forced a smile, trying to shake off the lingering unease. "Yeah, it was pretty intense." Megan noticed her discomfort and frowned. "You okay, Ellie? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Ellie replied quickly. "Just a bit shaken up. Let's find something a little calmer." They wandered through the fairground, the fog now so thick that it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The cheerful lights of the rides and stalls seemed to flicker and wane, casting eerie shadows that danced in the mist. As they passed by the old funhouse, Ellie felt an inexplicable pull to enter. The structure was dilapidated, its once bright colors faded and peeling. The sign above the entrance read, "House of Mirrors" in cracked, curling letters. "Let's go in here," Ellie suggested, surprising even herself. It looks interesting." Jake and Megan exchanged glances but shrugged. "Sure, why not?" Jake said. "Might be fun." They stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind them. The air was cool and damp, and a faint, musty smell lingered. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting distorted images that twisted and warped as they moved. Ellie led the way, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers had faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press down on her. She glanced at her reflection in one of the mirrors and gasped. Her face stared back at her, pale and gaunt, eyes wide with terror. She blinked, and the image was gone, replaced by her normal reflection. "Did you guys see that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "See what?" Jake replied, looking around. "It's just mirrors, Ellie." Ellie shook her head, feeling foolish. "Never mind." They continued through the maze of mirrors, their reflections multiplying and shifting with each step. Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, lurking just out of sight. Every now and then she caught glimpses of movement in the corner of her eye, but when she turned, there was nothing there. They reached the center of the funhouse, where a large, cracked mirror stood. The glass was cloudy and mottled, making it difficult to see their reflections clearly. Ellie stepped closer, peering into the depths of the mirror. As she stared, the surface seemed to ripple, and a face appeared. It was a young girl, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She reached out, her hand pressing against the glass as if trying to break through. "Help me," the girl whispered, her voice echoing in Ellie's mind. "Please, help me." Ellie stumbled back, her heart racing. "Did you see that?" Jake and Megan stepped forward, looking confused. "See what?" Megan asked. "The girl. She was in the mirror. She asked for help." Jake frowned, looking at the mirror. "There's nothing there, Ellie. Maybe you're just tired." Ellie shook her head, her mind racing. She knew what she had seen, and she knew it wasn't just her imagination. There was something deeply wrong with this place, something that went beyond the fog and the whispers. "We need to get out of here," she said urgently. "Now." They hurried out of the funhouse, the door slamming shut behind them. The fog had thickened even more, the fairground now a labyrinth of shadows and half-seen shapes. As they made their way through the mist, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The whispers had returned, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. "Help. Trapped. Leave." Ellie's heart pounded in her chest as they stumbled through the fog, desperate to find their way out. The fairground had promised a night of fun and excitement, but it had given them something far more sinister. The whispers in the dark were just the beginning. The next day, Ellie couldn't get the fairground out of her mind. The whispers, the ghostly girl in the mirror, and the thick fog that seemed to wrap around them like a suffocating shroud. It all felt too real to ignore. She decided to dig deeper into the fairground's history, hoping to find some explanation for the eerie occurrences. After school, Ellie headed to the town's small library. It was a quaint building, with shelves lined with dusty books and the comforting smell of old paper filling the air. Mrs. Carmichael, the town historian, greeted her with a warm smile. "Ellie, it's been a while since I've seen you here. What brings you in today?" Mrs. Carmichael asked, adjusting her glasses. "I was wondering if you have any information on the Elmwood Fairground," Ellie replied. "Anything about its history or any incidents that might have happened there?" Mrs. Carmichael's smile faltered, and a shadow crossed her face. "The fairground, you say? Well, it does have a rather dark past. What are you looking for exactly?" Anything about a Ferris wheel accident or a girl named Emily, Ellie said, feeling a shiver run down her spine. Mrs. Carmichael sighed and motioned for Ellie to follow her. They walked to a corner of the library where old newspapers and historical records were kept. Mrs. Carmichael pulled out a yellowed newspaper from a stack and handed it to Ellie. "This might be what you're looking for," she said quietly. Ellie unfolded the newspaper, her eyes scanning the headline. "Tragic accident at Elmwood Fairground claims several lives." The article detailed a horrific accident that occurred 20 years ago when the Ferris wheel malfunctioned, causing several carriages to plummet to the ground. Among the victims was a young girl named Emily Carter. As Ellie read the article, she felt a growing sense of dread. Emily's picture was included, a sweet-faced girl with big, innocent eyes. Ellie recognized her as the girl she had seen in the mirror. "It was a terrible tragedy," Mrs. Carmichael said softly. "The fairground closed down shortly after the accident. Some say it's haunted by the spirits of those who died that day." "Do you believe that?" Ellie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Carmichael hesitated. "I'm not sure what to believe, but there have been many stories over the years. People hearing voices, seeing apparitions. You're not the first to be curious about it." Ellie thanked Mrs. Carmichael and left the library, her mind racing. She had to tell Jake and Megan what she had discovered. Maybe it would help them understand what was happening. That evening, Ellie gathered her friends at her house. They sat in her room, the newspaper spread out on the bed between them. "So, the fairground is haunted by the victims of this accident?" Jake asked, looking skeptical. "I saw Emily in the mirror," Ellie insisted. "She asked for help. And the whispers. We all heard them, didn't we?" Megan nodded slowly. "I didn't want to believe it, but yeah, I heard them too. It felt like someone was following us the whole time." Jake rubbed his face, looking troubled. "Okay, let's say it is haunted. What do we do about it? We can't just leave those spirits trapped there." Ellie took a deep breath. "I think we need to find a way to help them move on. Maybe if we can understand what really happened and why they're still here, we can do something to set them free." Megan looked worried. "But how? It's not like we're ghost hunters or anything." "We'll figure it out," Ellie said determinedly. "We'll start by finding out more about Emily and the others who died. There has to be something in their stories that will help us understand why they're still here." Over the next few days, Ellie, Jake, and Megan delved into the town's history, uncovering more details about the victims of the Ferris wheel accident. They learned that Emily had been an only child, her parents devastated by her loss. The other victims included a couple on a date, a young boy, and the Ferris wheel operator himself. As they pieced together the tragic stories, Ellie began to feel a connection to the lost souls. The fairground had been a place of joy and laughter, but it had become a prison for those who perished there. One evening, Ellie had a dream. She was back at the fairground, the fog swirling around her. Emily stood before her, tears streaming down her face. "Please help us," Emily whispered. "We can't rest. He won't let us." "Who won't let you?" Ellie asked, her heart pounding. But before Emily could answer, a dark shadow loomed behind her, and Ellie woke up, gasping for breath. The next day, Ellie shared her dream with Jake and Megan. "There's something more going on," she said. "Emily mentioned he won't let us. We need to find out who she's talking about." They returned to the library, combing through more records and old newspapers. Finally, they found a mention of the fairground's former owner, Harold Blackwood, a man known for his stern demeanor and ruthless business practices. He had died shortly after the accident, his death shrouded in mystery. Do you think Harold's spirit is keeping them trapped? Megan asked, her voice trembling. Ellie nodded. It makes sense. If he was a cruel man in life, maybe he's still holding on to his power in death. We need to find a way to confront him and set the others free. As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows over the town, Ellie, Jake, and Megan knew they were about to embark on a dangerous mission. The haunted fairground held many secrets, and they were determined to uncover them all. The spirits of Emily and the others depended on it. The next weekend, Ellie, Jake, and Megan returned to the fairground with a new sense of purpose. Armed with the knowledge of the tragic past and the mysterious figure of Harold Blackwood, they were determined to uncover the truth and free the restless spirits. The fairground looked even more ominous than before, the fog thicker and the shadows deeper. The rides creaked and groaned as if whispering secrets of their own. Ellie shivered, but she steeled herself. She had a mission. As they walked through the fairground, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every so often, she caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye, but when she turned to look, there was nothing there. She wasn't the only one on edge. Jake and Megan also seemed jumpy, their eyes darting nervously. Their first stop was the Ferris wheel, the site of the original accident. The ride loomed above them, its carriages swaying gently in the breeze. Ellie stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. She could almost hear the echoes of screams from that fateful night. "Do you feel that?" Megan whispered, her voice trembling. "It's so cold here." Ellie nodded. "It's like there's a presence. Let's see if we can make contact." They gathered at the base of the Ferris wheel, holding hands in a circle. Ellie took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "We're here to help," she said softly. "If there are any spirits here, please show yourselves." For a moment, nothing happened. The fairground was eerily silent, the only sound the distant murmur of the crowd. Then, slowly, a mist began to form around them, coalescing into faint, ghostly shapes. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she saw the translucent figures of a young couple, their faces etched with sorrow. Nearby, a little boy stood clutching a teddy bear, his eyes wide with fear. And standing slightly apart from the others was Emily, her face pale and hauntingly beautiful. "Help us!" Emily's voice echoed, barely audible. "He won't let us go!" Ellie stepped forward, her heart aching for the lost souls. "Who won't let you go, Emily? How can we help you?" Emily's gaze shifted, and Ellie felt a chill run down her spine. She turned to see a dark figure emerging from the shadows. It was Harold Blackwood, his eyes cold and malevolent. He looked exactly as he had in the old photographs they had found, a tall, imposing man with a stern expression. "You dare to meddle in my affairs?" Blackwood's voice was a low growl, filled with menace. "This is my domain. These souls belong to me." Ellie felt a surge of fear, but stood her ground. "You can't keep them here forever. They deserve to rest in peace." Blackwood's eyes narrowed, and the air grew colder. "You think you can defy me, child? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Before Ellie could respond, a loud crash echoed through the fairground. She turned to see one of the carriages from the Ferris wheel had broken loose, tumbling to the ground with a deafening roar. The ghostly apparitions flinched, their forms flickering as if struggling to remain visible. "We have to do something," Jake said urgently. "He's going to hurt them." Ellie nodded, her mind racing. "We need to find a way to break his hold on them. There has to be something here that ties him to this place." They hurried away from the Ferris wheel, searching for any clue that might help them. As they passed by the funhouse, Ellie remembered the seance they had attempted. It had felt incomplete, as if they were missing a crucial element. "We need to perform a seance," Ellie said, determination in her voice. "But this time we have to do it right. We need to find something that belonged to Blackwood, something that will help us reach him." They made their way to the Fairground's office, a small building near the entrance. The door was locked, but Jake managed to pry it open with a crowbar they found nearby. Inside, the office was dusty and cluttered, filled with old papers and memorabilia from the Fairground's past. Ellie rifled through the desk drawers, searching for anything that might belong to Blackwood. At the bottom of one drawer, she found a small, tarnished locket. She opened it to reveal a faded photograph of a woman, presumably Blackwood's wife. "This must be it," she said, showing the locket to Jake and Megan. "We'll use this in the seance. It might be enough to break his hold." They returned to the Ferris wheel, the ghostly apparition still lingering nearby. Holding the locket, Ellie led the seance, her voice steady and strong. "Harold Blackwood, we summon you," she intoned. "We seek to understand your pain and offer peace to the souls trapped here. Release them and find your own rest." The air crackled with energy, and the ghostly figure of Blackwood appeared once more. His expression was one of anger and defiance, but there was also a flicker of something else, perhaps regret or sorrow. "You cannot make me leave," Blackwood hissed. "This is my domain." "Your time is over," Ellie replied firmly. "You must let go." As the seance continued, the locket in Ellie's hand began to glow softly. The ghostly apparitions watched, their forms growing more solid and real. Blackwood's expression changed, his stern facade cracking. "Please," Emily whispered, "let us go." Blackwood's eyes met Ellie's, and she saw a glimmer of humanity in them. Slowly he began to fade, his form dissolving into the mist. "No!" he roared, but his voice was growing weaker. "This is not the end!" With a final mournful cry, Harold Blackwood vanished, the locket in Ellie's hand cooling and dimming. The ghostly apparitions around them began to fade as well, their faces peaceful. "Thank you," Emily's voice echoed, the last to disappear. Ellie, Jake, and Megan stood in silence, the fairground eerily quiet once more. The fog began to lift, revealing the twinkling lights and vibrant colors of the rides and stalls. "We did it," Jake said softly. "We set them free." Ellie nodded, tears in her eyes. "I hope they found peace." As they left the fairground, the whispers were gone, replaced by the gentle hum of the night. The fairground had been a place of tragedy and sorrow, but now it felt like a place of peace. But as they walked away, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. There were still secrets to uncover, and the fairground's haunted past was not yet fully laid to rest. The following weekend, Ellie, Jake, and Megan decided to visit the fairground one more time. They had freed the spirits of Emily and the other victims, but a nagging sense of unfinished business lingered. The fairground still held dark secrets, and Ellie felt compelled to uncover them. As they entered the gates, the fairground appeared more welcoming. The fog had lifted, and the vibrant lights once again bathed the area in a warm glow. Laughter and music filled the air, but Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. "Let's check out the clown attraction," Jake suggested. "We've been avoiding it, but we should see if there's anything strange there." Ellie and Megan agreed. The clown attraction, known as Giggles Funhouse, stood near the center of the fairground. It was a gaudy structure painted in bright, garish colors, with a large clown face above the entrance. Its wide grin and empty eyes were unsettling, even in the daylight. As they approached, Ellie noticed the ticket booth was unmanned, and the entrance door stood ajar, creaking in the breeze. She exchanged a worried glance with Jake and Megan. "We should be careful," Megan warned. "This place gives me the creeps." They stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind them. The interior was dimly lit, with twisted hallways and rooms filled with clown-themed decorations. Mannequin clowns stood in various poses, their painted smiles frozen in time. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Ellie felt her heart race as they navigated the narrow corridors. The whispers had ceased, but the oppressive silence was even more unnerving. Suddenly, a soft, mechanical laugh echoed through the funhouse. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a maniacal cackle that sent chills down their spines. "What was that?" Jake whispered, his voice shaky. "I don't know, but we need to find out," Ellie replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. They followed the sound, which led them to a large room at the center of the funhouse. In the middle of the room stood a life-sized clown mannequin, its painted face grotesque and exaggerated. Its eyes seemed to follow them as they entered. "This is so creepy," Megan muttered, her eyes darting around the room. As they approached the mannequin, the laughter grew louder, emanating from the clown itself. Ellie felt a cold draft and shivered. She reached out to touch the mannequin, but before she could, its eyes flashed red, and it sprang to life. "Welcome to Giggles Funhouse!" it boomed, its voice mechanical but filled with malice. "Prepare to be entertained, forever!" The room plunged into darkness, and the only light came from the clown's glowing eyes. The walls began to close in, the space growing smaller and smaller. Ellie's heart pounded as she tried to find an exit. "Run!" Jake shouted, grabbing Ellie and Megan's hands. They stumbled through the darkness, the laughter echoing around them. As they fled, Ellie felt a cold, clammy hand grip her shoulder. She screamed, turning to see the clown's painted face leering at her, its eyes filled with a malevolent gleam. "You can't escape," it hissed. "This is my domain." Ellie struggled, breaking free from the clown's grasp. They burst through a doorway, finding themselves back in the maze of corridors. The laughter continued to follow them, relentless and mocking. "We need to find a way to stop it," Ellie panted, her mind racing. "There has to be something that's giving it power." They searched the funhouse frantically, the clown's presence always just behind them. Finally, they stumbled upon a hidden room at the back of the funhouse. Inside, they found a small altar with a twisted, malevolent-looking clown doll at its center. It was surrounded by candles and strange symbols painted on the walls. "This must be it," Megan said, her voice trembling. "This is what's controlling the clown." Ellie grabbed the doll, feeling a surge of cold energy. "We need to destroy this." With a determined look, she smashed the doll against the floor. As it shattered, the laughter ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The funhouse seemed to exhale, the walls relaxing back into place. They stumbled out of Giggles's funhouse, breathing heavily. The fairground was eerily quiet, the cheerful noises from earlier replaced by an uneasy stillness. "That was too close," Jake said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What was that thing?" "I don't know," Ellie replied, "but it's gone now. We've dealt with Harold Blackwood and his malevolent spirit, but this place has more secrets than we realized." Megan nodded, her face pale but resolute. "We need to be careful. There's something deeply wrong with this fairground. It's like it's alive, feeding off the fear and misery." Ellie looked back at the now quiet funhouse, her mind filled with questions. They had destroyed the clown doll, but what other dark forces lurked within the fairground's shadows? As they walked away, the fairground seemed to watch them, its secrets still hidden, waiting to be uncovered. The haunted fairground had more stories to tell, and Ellie, Jake, and Megan were determined to uncover them all. Ellie, Jake, and Megan gathered in Ellie's basement the following night, their minds still reeling from their encounter with the possessed clown. They needed answers, and Ellie was determined to find them. She had borrowed a book on spiritual communication from Mrs. Carmichael, hoping it would guide them in contacting the spirits more effectively. "We need to do this right," Ellie said, spreading the book out on the table. "If we're going to help the spirits and uncover the fairground secrets, we need to find a way to communicate with them directly." Megan looked apprehensive. "Are you sure this is a good idea? What if we make things worse?" "We have to try," Jake said firmly. "We've come this far. We can't back down now." Ellie nodded in agreement. "Let's set up the seance. We'll need candles, a table, and something personal from the fairground. I still have the locket we used before." They gathered the necessary items and arranged them on a small round table. Ellie placed the locket in the center and lit the candles, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. The atmosphere grew heavy, charged with anticipation. They joined hands, forming a circle around the table. Ellie took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with determination. "Spirits of the Elmwood Fairground, we call upon you. We seek to understand your pain and offer you peace. Guide us to the truth and help us set you free." For a moment, nothing happened. The basement was silent except for the soft crackle of the candle flames. Then, the air grew colder, and a faint, almost imperceptible whisper filled the room. "Help us!" Ellie's grip tightened on Jake and Megan's hands. "We hear you. Please, tell us how we can help." The whispering grew louder, more distinct. Shadows flickered on the walls, taking on vague human shapes. Ellie recognized Emily's voice among the whispers. "Find the book." Ellie's heart raced. "What book, Emily? Where is it?" "Hidden in the office." The air crackled with energy, and the shadows on the walls began to coalesce into more distinct forms. Ellie could see the faces of the spirits, the young couple, the boy with the teddy bear, and Emily. They looked desperate, their eyes pleading. "The book holds the key," Emily's voice echoed. "He won't let us go until it's found." "Who?" Ellie asked urgently. "Who won't let you go?" "Harold." The basement door suddenly slammed shut, and a cold wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. The shadows disappeared, and the whispers faded into silence. Ellie, Jake, and Megan were left in darkness, their breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. "We need to find that book," Jake said, his voice shaking. "It's the only way to stop Harold and free the spirits." Ellie nodded, her resolve hardening. "We'll go back to the fairground tomorrow and search the office. We have to find it." The next day, they returned to the fairground, determined to uncover the truth. The atmosphere was tense, the fairground's cheerful exterior hiding the darkness within. They headed straight for the office, their footsteps echoing on the empty grounds. Ellie pushed open the door, and they stepped inside. The room was just as they had left it, cluttered with old papers and memorabilia. They began their search, rifling through drawers and cabinets, looking for any sign of the book Emily had mentioned. After what felt like hours, Megan let out a triumphant cry. "I found something." She pulled a dusty, leather-bound book from the bottom of a filing cabinet. The cover was worn, and the pages were yellowed with age. Ellie took it from her, feeling a surge of hope. "This must be it," she said, opening the book. Inside, they found pages filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and strange symbols. It appeared to be a journal of some sort, detailing the Fairground's history and the dark rituals performed by Harold Blackwood. As they read through the journal, they discovered that Blackwood had dabbled in the occult, using dark magic to bind the spirits of the Fairground to his will. He had believed that by harnessing their energy, he could gain immortality and ultimate power. "This is it," Ellie said, her voice filled with determination. "This is how we stop him. We need to undo the rituals and break the bindings." They took the book and made their way back to the Ferris wheel, the site of the original accident. As they approached, the air grew colder, and the whispers returned, more urgent than ever. "Hurry!" Ellie, Jake, and Megan formed a circle around the Ferris wheel's base, the journal open in Ellie's hands. She began to read the incantations aloud, her voice steady and clear. "By the power of the light, we break the chains of darkness. We free the spirits bound by Harold Blackwood and return them to the peace they deserve." The ground beneath them trembled, and a cold wind whipped around them. The Ferris wheel creaked and groaned, the lights flickering wildly. The air was thick with tension, as if the fairground itself was resisting their efforts. "Keep going," Jake urged, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. Ellie continued the incantation, her voice growing stronger. "We banish the darkness and restore the light. Harold Blackwood, your reign of terror ends now." A deafening roar filled the air, and a dark figure materialized before them. It was Harold Blackwood, his eyes filled with rage and defiance. "You cannot defeat me!" he bellowed. "This is my domain!" Ellie stood her ground, her eyes locked on Blackwood. "Your time is over. You cannot hold these spirits any longer." With a final, powerful incantation, Ellie completed the ritual. The air crackled with energy, and a blinding light enveloped the fairground. Blackwood's form began to dissolve, his screams of anger and despair echoing into the night. As the light faded, the fairground grew still. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. The spirits of Emily and the others appeared one last time, their faces serene and grateful. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her form shimmering in the light. "We're free." Ellie, Jake, and Megan watched as the spirits slowly faded, finally at rest. The fairground, once a place of tragedy and sorrow, now felt like a place of healing and peace. They left the fairground, the journal in hand, knowing that they had finally uncovered the truth and set the spirits free. But as they walked away, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was not yet over. The fairground had many secrets, and there were still dark forces at play. But for now, they had won a victory. The spirits of the Elmwood Fairground were free, and Harold Blackwood's reign of terror had come to an end. The haunted fairground had been cleansed, but Ellie knew that the fight against darkness was far from over. Though they had freed the spirits of Emily and the others, Ellie, Jake, and Megan couldn't shake the feeling that something dark still lingered within the fairground. Their victory over Harold Blackwood felt incomplete, and the oppressive atmosphere of the place continued to gnaw at their minds. The trio decided to meet at Ellie's house to discuss their next steps. They sat around the kitchen table, the journal open between them, its pages filled with cryptic notes and sinister rituals. "We freed the spirits," Jake said, "but it still feels like there's something wrong with that place." "I agree," Megan added, her face etched with worry. "Maybe Blackwood wasn't the only force at work. We need to find out what else is haunting the fairground." Ellie nodded, her resolve hardening. "We need to dig deeper. There has to be something in this journal that can help us understand what we're dealing with." They spent hours poring over the journal, deciphering the archaic language and trying to piece together the fragmented story it told. As night fell, Ellie found a passage that caught her attention. "Listen to this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Blackwood wasn't just using the spirits for power. He was trying to summon something, a malevolent force that would grant him ultimate control over the Fairground and its visitors. Jake leaned in closer. "What kind of force?" "It's called the Dark One," Ellie read aloud. "A powerful entity from another realm, capable of feeding on fear and suffering. Blackwood believed that by summoning the Dark One, he could harness its power and achieve immortality." Megan shivered. "So the Fairground isn't just haunted by spirits. It's a gateway for this Dark One. We need to find a way to close that gateway," Ellie said firmly. "If the Dark One is still here, it's feeding on the fear of everyone who visits the Fairground. We have to stop it." Armed with this new information, they made their way back to the Fairground under the cover of darkness. The familiar sense of dread settled over them as they approached, the once vibrant lights now flickering weakly, casting long, eerie shadows. They headed straight for the Ferris wheel, the epicenter of the Fairground's dark energy. As they neared, the air grew colder, and the whispers returned, more insistent and malevolent than ever. "You shouldn't have come back," a voice hissed from the shadows. It was Blackwood, his spectral form flickering in and out of view. "You cannot stop what I have begun." Ellie stepped forward, her voice steady. "We're not afraid of you, Blackwood. We're here to end this." Blackwood laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "You think you've won, but you've only scratched the surface. The Dark One is already here, feeding on your fear. You cannot hope to defeat it." Ignoring his taunts, Ellie, Jake, and Megan formed a circle around the Ferris wheel. Ellie held the journal tightly, flipping to the page with the ritual that Blackwood had used to summon the Dark One. She knew that reversing the ritual was their only hope of closing the gateway and banishing the entity for good. "By the power of light, we banish the darkness," Ellie began, her voice strong and clear. "We seal the gateway and deny the Dark One its feast of fear." The ground beneath them rumbled, and the air crackled with dark energy. A shadowy figure began to materialize in the center of the Ferris wheel, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. The Dark One's presence was overwhelming, a palpable force of pure malevolence. "You cannot banish me," the Dark One growled, its voice a deep, resonant echo. "I am eternal. I am fear itself." Ellie continued the incantation, her voice unwavering. "We call upon the spirits of the Fairground. Lend us your strength to banish this darkness and restore peace." The spirits of Emily and the others appeared, their forms glowing with a soft, ethereal light. They joined hands with Ellie, Jake, and Megan, their combined energy creating a barrier of light around the Ferris wheel. The Dark One roared in fury, its shadowy form thrashing against the barrier. "You are nothing! You cannot defeat me!" With a final, powerful incantation, Ellie completed the ritual. "By the light of the spirits, we banish you, Dark One. Return to the void from whence you came." The barrier of light intensified, enveloping the Dark One. The entity's form twisted and shrieked, its screams echoing through the Fairground. Slowly, the darkness began to dissipate, the malevolent force retreating back into the void. As the Dark One vanished, the Fairground grew still. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. The spirits of Emily and the others smiled, their forms shimmering as they began to fade. "Thank you," Emily whispered one last time. "We are free." Ellie, Jake, and Megan watched as the spirits disappeared, their faces filled with relief and triumph. The Fairground, once a place of fear and darkness, now felt like a place of healing and peace. They left the fairground, knowing that they had finally put an end to the malevolent force that had haunted it for so long. The Dark One was banished, and the spirits were at rest. The haunted fairground was no more, and Ellie, Jake, and Megan could finally move forward, knowing they had brought light to a place of darkness. Even though they had banished the Dark One and freed the spirits, Ellie, Jake, and Megan couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. The fairground felt peaceful now, but there was a feeling that something more profound had yet to be resolved. They decided it was time to bring closure to their ordeal by uncovering the last of the fairground's secrets and ensuring its malevolent past was finally put to rest. "We need a plan," Ellie said as they gathered in her living room. "We face spirits and the Dark One, but there's still something we're missing. Something that ties everything together." Jake nodded. "We need to find any remaining traces of Blackwood's influence and eliminate them for good. Maybe there's something in the journal we overlooked." They opened the journal once more, scanning its pages for any clues they might have missed. Megan's eyes widened as she pointed to a passage they had previously skipped over, believing it irrelevant. "Look at this," Megan said. "There's mention of a hidden chamber beneath the fairground. It says it's where Blackwood conducted his darkest rituals. If there's any trace of his influence left, it would be there." Ellie felt a shiver run down her spine. "We have to find that chamber. If it's still there, it could hold the key to destroying Blackwood's legacy once and for all." Armed with the knowledge from the journal, they made their way back to the fairground under the cover of darkness. The familiar sense of dread was absent, replaced by a determined resolve. They knew this was their final confrontation with the dark history of the fairground. They headed to the center of the fairground where the Ferris wheel stood. According to the journal, the entrance to the hidden chamber was nearby. They searched the area, looking for any sign of a hidden door or passage. Jake's flashlight beam fell upon a patch of ground that looked different from the rest. He knelt down, brushing away dirt and debris to reveal a rusted metal hatch. "This has to be it," Jake said, his voice filled with anticipation. Ellie took a deep breath and gripped the handle, pulling it open with a creak. A set of narrow stone steps descended into darkness. The air that wafted up from below was cold and damp, carrying a faint smell of decay. "Let's do this," Ellie said, leading the way down the steps. They descended into the darkness, their flashlights casting long, eerie shadows on the stone walls. The passage was narrow and winding, and the air grew colder with each step. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the bottom, finding themselves in a large, cavernous chamber. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old books, jars of strange substances, and ritualistic artifacts. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, its surface stained with dark, dried blood. Symbols and runes were etched into the stone, their meanings lost to time. "This is it," Megan whispered. "This is where Blackwood performed his rituals." Ellie approached the altar, feeling a chill run down her spine. "We need to destroy everything here. If we do, we can break Blackwood's hold once and for all." They began to gather the books and artifacts, piling them in the center of the chamber. As they worked, Ellie found a small, blackened book hidden beneath the altar. She opened it, her eyes widening as she realized it was Blackwood's personal grimoire. "This is it," Ellie said, holding up the grimoire. "This is what we need to destroy." With a sense of finality, they piled the grimoire on top of the other items. Ellie took a deep breath and struck a match, lighting the pile on fire. The flames roared to life, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The ground beneath them trembled, and a deep, resonant growl echoed through the chamber. Ellie felt a surge of fear but stood her ground, watching as the flames consumed Blackwood's dark legacy. "You cannot defeat me," a voice hissed from the shadows. It was Blackwood, his spectral form flickering in and out of view. "I will return. I am eternal." Ellie stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. "No, you won't. Your time is over. We're ending this." As the flames grew higher, the chamber filled with a blinding light. Blackwood's form twisted and shrieked, his screams echoing through the cavern. Slowly, his presence began to dissolve, the dark energy dissipating into the air. With a final mournful cry, Harold Blackwood vanished, his hold on the Fairground finally broken. The flames died down, leaving only ashes and charred remains. Ellie, Jake, and Megan stood in silence, the weight of their victory sinking in. They had faced the darkest forces of the Fairground and emerged victorious. The malevolent presence that had haunted the Fairground for so long was gone, its influence destroyed. They made their way back up the stone steps, emerging into the cool night air. The Fairground felt different now, lighter, more peaceful. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and healing. "We did it," Jake said, his voice filled with relief. "We really did it." Ellie nodded, a smile breaking across her face. The Fairground is finally free. As they left the Fairground behind, Ellie knew they had brought an end to its dark history. The haunted Fairground was no more, and its secrets had been laid to rest. They had faced their fears and emerged stronger, knowing they had made a difference. But as they walked away, Ellie couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The Fairground had been a place of darkness and fear, but it had also brought them together and tested their courage. They had faced the unknown and triumphed, bringing light to a place that had been shrouded in darkness for far too long. With the remnants of Harold Blackwood's malevolence seemingly eradicated, Ellie, Jake, and Megan felt a tentative sense of relief. But deep down, Ellie sensed one final reckoning awaited them. They couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that their ordeal wasn't entirely over. One evening, Ellie received a call from Mrs. Carmichael, the town historian. Her voice trembled with urgency. "Ellie, you need to come to the library. There's something you need to see. It's about the Fairground." Without hesitation, Ellie gathered Jake and Megan, and they hurried to the library. Mrs. Carmichael met them at the entrance, her expression grave. "I found an old document," she explained, leading them to a table where a weathered scroll lay unfurled. "It's an account from the town's founding days, long before Blackwood's time. It speaks of an ancient malevolent entity that was bound to the land where the Fairground now stands." Ellie's heart sank as she scanned the document. The entity, referred to as the Shadow, had been worshipped by a cult that performed dark rituals to bind it to the land. Blackwood's attempts to summon the Dark One had likely reawakened this ancient evil. "This is worse than we thought," Jake said, his voice barely a whisper. "We didn't just deal with Blackwood. We stirred up something much older and more powerful." Megan shivered. "How do we stop it?" Mrs. Carmichael placed a hand on Ellie's shoulder. "There's a ritual described here that can banish the shadow for good, but it's dangerous. It requires the presence of those who have already confronted the darkness." Ellie squared her shoulders. "We have to do it. We've come this far. We can't let the shadow continue to haunt the Fairground." The trio prepared for the final confrontation, gathering the necessary items for the ritual: candles, salt, and a chalice filled with purified water. Mrs. Carmichael insisted on joining them, her knowledge and experience invaluable. They returned to the Fairground under a moonless sky, the air heavy with foreboding. The once vibrant lights were now dark, and an eerie silence hung over the grounds. They made their way to the center of the Fairground, where they had banished Blackwood's spirit. "This is it," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "We have to be ready for anything." They formed a circle, lighting the candles and spreading a ring of salt around them. Ellie held the chalice, its surface shimmering in the faint light. As she began the incantation, the air grew colder, and shadows danced at the edges of their vision. "Ancient spirit of darkness," Ellie intoned, her voice strong and clear. "We call upon the light to banish you. We reject your hold on this land and command you to return to the void." The ground beneath them rumbled, and a low, resonant growl filled the air. The shadows coalesced into a towering figure, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. The shadow's eyes burned with malevolent intelligence, and its presence exuded pure evil. "You dare to challenge me?" The shadow's voice was a deep, guttural roar. "You are nothing but children playing with forces beyond your comprehension." "We've faced your darkness before," Ellie replied, her grip tightening on the chalice. "We're not afraid of you." As Ellie continued the incantation, the shadow lashed out, tendrils of darkness striking at the circle of light. The candles flickered but held firm. Mrs. Carmichael joined in the chant, her voice adding strength to the ritual. "We bind you, Ancient One," Mrs. Carmichael chanted. "By the power of light, we banish you from this place." The shadow howled in fury, its form writhing as if in pain. The ground beneath them trembled violently, and Ellie feared they might be torn apart. But she held her ground, her voice unwavering. "By the light of the spirits, we command you to leave!" Ellie cried, lifting the chalice high. A blinding light erupted from the chalice, enveloping the shadow. The entity's form twisted and shrieked, its screams echoing through the night. Slowly, it began to dissolve, the dark energy dissipating into the air. "No!" The shadow roared, its voice growing weaker. "This cannot be!" With a final agonizing scream, the shadow vanished, leaving only the faintest wisp of smoke. The ground stopped trembling, and a profound silence fell over the fairground. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and finality. Ellie, Jake, Megan, and Mrs. Carmichael stood in stunned silence, the weight of their victory sinking in. They had faced the ultimate darkness and emerged victorious. "We did it," Megan whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "It's finally over." Ellie nodded, a smile breaking across her face. "The fairground is free. For good this time." As they left the fairground, the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the grounds. The haunted fairground was no more, its dark past finally laid to rest. Ellie, Jake, and Megan had faced their greatest fears and triumphed, bringing light and peace to a place that had been shrouded in darkness for far too long. The fairground, once a place of fear and sorrow, was now a place of healing and hope. And as they walked away, they knew that their journey had come to an end, but the bonds they had forged in the face of darkness would last a lifetime.